Hi, boys and girls. Welcome back after Christmas vacation. And I'm still sad to not see you in the library, so until we get back in the library, I'm still going to continue to read. So we're going to go to Chapter 3 of Amelia, Bedelia, and Friends, Beat the Clock. Okay, we didn't get all the way to Chapter 3, I don't think. So we'll start up here on page 14. NQ, said Mrs. Shock. The builder carved those Roman numerals to record the year the building was built. Well, what year was MCMXX? Asked Heather. Reading Roman numerals is kind of like breaking a code, said Mrs. Shock. And so the letters are numbers and the numbers are letters? Asked Amelia Bedelia. Exactly, Amelia Bedelia, said Mrs. Shock. The letter M stands for the number 1000. The letter X is 10. Now, what if you have 2 M's and 2 X's? That's 2000 plus 20, said Dawn, which was last year. That's right. Or that's this year, 2020, said Rose. That's right, said Mrs. Shock. The year 2020 is written MMXX in Roman numerals. Right there. But our cornerstone has a C between the 2 M's, said Joy. Wow, thought Amelia Bedelia. Mrs. Shock was right about Joy. She definitely saw things that most people didn't notice. Good point, said Mrs. Shock. Well, the letter C comes from the Latin word cent, which means 100. That's where we get the word century, which means 100 years. And a cent is 1/100th of a dollar. Our class has our very own cent, said Amelia Bedelia. Her name is Penny. Get it? Her name's Penny after a penny. Okay. Amelia Bedelia grabbed Penny by the wrist, pulling her to her feet to take a bow. The rule with Roman numerals is that putting a letter in front of another one subtracts that amount. Oh, I did not know this. Anyway, said Mrs. Shock, so putting a C in front of an M subtracts 100 from 1000. Well, that makes 900, said Joy. The first M is 1000 and the second is 900. So the year is 1900 plus 20 makes it 1920. And then you write it MCMXX. And that is why we are having a centennial celebration, said Mrs. Shock. A centennial is a celebration that happens every 100 years, said Heather. My great-grandmother just had hers. Centennial comes from Latin, too, said Mrs. Shock. For a dead language, Latin sure keeps popping up, said Amelia Bedelia. Latin must be a zombie language, said Cliff. It refuses to die. Well, why didn't the ancient Romans just use regular numbers? Asked Chip. I think Roman numerals look older and more important, said Holly. Expensive watches use Roman numerals, said Mrs. Shock. Some people makes it think it looks. God, can I say this sentence? Some people think it makes them look more elegant. Roman numerals are fun, said Clay. If I gave you a quiz on them, would you get 100%? Asked Mrs. Shock. Yep, because percent is Latin, said Clay. Amelia Bedelia was raising her hand to ask about percentages when the voice of doom came over the intercom. Mrs. Shock, I still need an attendance report from you, said Mrs. Roman. Amelia Bedelia froze with her hand still up in the air. Even Mrs. Shock was so startled that she jumped. Oh, thanks for volunteering, Amelia Bedelia, said Mrs. Shock, writing down the attendance number on a slip of paper and handing it to Amelia Bedelia. Let's see if Mrs. Roman lives up to her name. Amelia Bedelia shrugged. She hadn't meant to volunteer, but it was always fun to be sent on a mission during class. When she passed Clay on the way out, he caught her arm and whispered, You lucky duck. Just remember, Mrs. Roman probably invented those numbers, so stay on her good side. Quack, said Amelia Bedelia with a laugh. Okay, so we'll try to get through chapter 13, or chapter 3. Watch it. Watch it. Amelia Bedelia waddled as fast as she could down the hall, and when she was sure that no one was looking, she started running, and by the time she got to the office, she was out of breath. "My goodness, Amelia Bedelia," said Mrs. Hotchkiss. "Even I can walk to your classroom without getting winded." Miss Roman's eyes narrowed to slits. "Amelia Bedelia, you did walk here, correct?" she said. Amelia Bedelia couldn't catch her breath. Finally, she nodded and handed Miss Roman the piece of paper that Miss Shock had given her. Mrs. Roman opened the attendance report. She turned it around and around and then finally turned it upside down. Frowning, she looked at Amelia Bedelia. "Is this a joke, Amelia Bedelia?" asked Mrs. Roman. "What kind of a number is this?" Uh-oh, thought Amelia Bedelia. It looked like when Mrs. Roman was unhappy, her bad side was her front. Mrs. Roman was still squinting at Amelia Bedelia and shaking her head back and forth when Mrs. Hotchkiss took the piece of paper from her. Miss Hotchkiss laughed. "Would you read this for Mrs. Roman, Amelia Bedelia?" she asked. XX is 20 plus 5, or plus V is 5, and I think that's II, is 2, which equals 27, said Amelia Bedelia. "Perfect," said Mrs. Hotchkiss. "And perfect attendance. You should study your Roman numerals, Mrs. Roman." "Mrs. Shock wondered if you would live up to your name," said Amelia Bedelia. "Oh, she did she?" said Mrs. Roman. Miss Hotchkiss laughed again. "Sounds like..." What's with my phone? "Sounds like Clay is trying to get on my bad side," said Mrs. Roman. Oh no, thought Amelia Bedelia. She had wanted to stay on Mrs. Roman's good side. Now she was on her bad side, dragging Mrs. Shock and Clay along with her. If she made Mrs. Roman mad at Clay, Amelia Bedelia would not be a lucky duck in his eyes. She would be a dead duck. "Oh, Clay never wants to be on your bad side," said Amelia Bedelia. "But I don't think you have a bad side. Your front, back, and both sides look all good to me." "Thank you so much," said Mrs. Roman, smiling. "That's very nice of you." "Don't thank me yet," said Mr. Jack, the school's custodian, as he walked into the office. Mr. Jack went by his first name because he said he was a jack of all trades. "Wait until I finish your job. I put the easel in the lobby. Now, which picture do you want moved out there?" "The one on the wall behind the counter," said Mrs. Hotchkiss. It was the first photograph of the students and the teachers at Oak Tree Elementary, taken in 1920. She pointed at a large framed black and white photograph. Amelia Bedelia had always wondered who the people in the photograph were. She had been in the office lots of times, but had never had a chance to ask. "Is that really our school?" she said. "You bet, Amelia Bedelia. Look right here," said Mrs. Roman, pointing to that picture, obviously. Pointing to a little tree, a little tree in the foreground. This little sapling grew up to be the giant oak out front. It's a really big picture," said Amelia Bedelia. "They must have used a huge camera. The original picture was small. I'm sure they blew it up," said Mrs. Hotchkiss. "Really? They blew it up?" "They enlarged it as much as possible," said Mrs. Roman. "Need any help, Mr. Jack?" "I'll try it single-handedly, but this thing is heavier than it looks," said Mr. Jack said. "It must be heavy," thought Amelia Bedelia. Mr. Jack was using both of his hands to lift it, carrying it double-handedly. She was standing between Mr. Jack and the office door. She was about to move out of the way when Mr. Jack asked for help. "Watch it," said Mr. Jack, walking toward Amelia Bedelia with the huge framed photo. He seemed to be having some trouble seeing where he was going. "Watch it," he said to Amelia Bedelia again. And as usual, Amelia Bedelia did what she was told. She watched the frame picture. She did not move at all. Bam! The frame crashed into the counter. Mr. Jack set the photograph down on the floor, leaning it against the front of the counter. "I was asking Amelia Bedelia to be careful and move out of my way," he explained, looking embarrassed. "That's okay. It was an accident," said Mrs. Hotchkiss. "Accidents happen," said Mrs. Roman. Amelia Bedelia was relieved. She must be on Mrs. Roman's good side after all. And that was when Amelia Bedelia spied the envelope that had fallen to the floor when the framed photograph hit the counter. She picked it up, and it was addressed to the principal in beautiful cursive handwriting. She handed it to Miss Hotchkiss. "What's this for?" said Miss Hotchkiss. "It's for the principal, and that's you," said Amelia Bedelia. "It's written in cursive." "Cursive writing is becoming a lost art like Roman numerals," said Mrs. Roman. "But where did this envelope come from?" asked Mrs. Hotchkiss. "From the photo," said Amelia Bedelia. "Mr. Jack was telling me to watch it, and I was watching it, and I saw the envelope fall onto the floor when the picture frame banged the counter." Mrs. Roman took the envelope from Ms. Hotchkiss. She used a sharp letter opener to slit open the top edge. "It would be a shame to tear into an envelope this pretty," she said. "Someone took a lot of trouble to make it look so nice." And she handed it back to Miss Hotchkiss, who just kept staring down at it. "Well, I can't stand the suspense," said Mrs. Roman. "Would you like me to read it for you?" "Thank you, but I can do it. It's addressed to me, after all," said Miss Hotchkiss. "I'm just surprised, and I do love a mystery." She pulled the letter out of the envelope and unfolded it, and it was written in the same fancy cursive writing. Amelia Bedelia noticed that Miss Hotchkiss was moving her lips as she read silently. "Oh, my," Miss Hotchkiss said, looking up at them, and then she kept reading. "Well, what does it say?" asked Mrs. Roman. My," said Miss Hotchkiss. "Is that all it says?" asked Amelia Bedelia. After she'd read a little more, Miss Hotchkiss looked up again. "Oh, my goodness," she said, and then went back to reading. "Is it a bill or something broken? Did something flood?" asked Mr. Jack. "Oh, my goodness gracious," said Miss Hotchkiss, and she handed the note to Mrs. Roman. "Read it yourself. Read it to everyone. The picture hitting the counter was no accident." Okay, we're going to stop there. Next week, we'll find out why it was no accident. Have a good week, boys and girls.